Welcome to Different Gravy, not just another Sheffield Wednesday podcast. I'm one of the hosts, Richard Miller, and my co-host, fresh off the phone to his pop-pop, fourth generation Wednesday fan, Dr. Luke Gledall. How are you doing today, Luke?
I'm very good, Rich. Yeah.
Steeped in Wednesday, as we'll find out this episode.
Dipped into the River Wednesday, held by his Achilles.
You're determined to be the final of your kind, aren't you? You refuse to procreate. One of your famous things.
What am I? What? Sorry.
One of the famous things that's known about you on the Wikipedia, on the wiki of Luke Gledall. No?
Refuses to procreate.
Absolutely refuses.
I guess that fits in the narrative with my sex life. So, yeah.
Anyway, I'm not going to go too far down that line, but
for sure, let's abandon that.
You want to roll it back and say you're open to offers, that's fine. I think that's
sure.
Oh, we've got off on such a strange foot. Apologies.
It's all right. I think we mentioned this in a previous episode. Was it like I've got that LinkedIn, the green profile ring open to boning, I think it is.
Open to boning. Isn't that just having any presence online is basically a low level just
I think so, yeah. I think that's where we are as a human species. Like all the time, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There was a really good SNL sketch a couple of weeks ago, which was like, why did you like that? Or why did you hit like?
Yes.
And then, and it was just basically like the only reason anyone ever hits like on an Instagram post is because they're secretly hoping that they will be noticed by that person and somehow finagle their way into a romantic tryst with them. You know, it's like Kim Kardashian has 200 million followers. Why did you hit like on that photo? Is that, well, sort of hoping she'd see it. And then I think they went back and it's like, you'd hit one from 5 months ago. Well, I was just thinking if I did an older one, maybe she'd notice that. But we have a bit of we're in the the holiday taint of of the football seasons, betwixt and between two seasons of football, and we like to stretch our legs a little. And one of the things we're doing this time around, hopefully it's a treat. Certainly something I've enjoyed doing from my part in. But there's folks outside of you and I who get mentioned on this podcast fairly often. Their opinions get aired, their stories sometimes get aired, and we thought it'd be nice to reach out to a couple of those characters, those extra sort of hidden characters in our podcast world, the extended gravy universe, and.
That's right, folks. It's a spin-off TV series.
Yes, we're doing 6-part mini-series about all of the people mentioned, whether you want it or not.
One division. Should we use that
Division
joke again?
one division from Different Gravy. But so effectively boils down to this week's episode is you having a conversation with your father. And the follow-up episode will be me talking to my sister Suze, who gets watches matches with me and gets mentioned fairly often as well. So I think probably without further ado, let's cut to the interview itself, and then we can talk a bit about it afterwards. Sound good?
Sounds great. So welcome to part 1 of 2 of the Different Gravy interview sessions. And today I've got the pleasure of chatting with my dad, Steve Gledall. So hi, Dad.
Hello there, Luke. Good to talk to you.
It's lovely
And good
to
to talk
you
about
too.
Wednesday, although over the years we have spoken many times of life in Sheffield 6.
We have indeed. I was wondering, Dad, if just an intro for yourself and your backstory, can you tell me about how you became a Wednesdayite?
Okay, well, I'm basically a third generation Wednesdayite. My grandfather, who was, I don't know whether he was born there, but he lived in Neepsend, which was, once Wednesday went out to Hillsborough, was very much Wednesday territory. And he sort of flew the flag initially. I used to talk to him about football and in the 30s a little bit, not as much as I wish I had, because he would recount various people with names that if I look through the record books, I go, oh yeah, you know, but I never saw play, like Jimmy Seed and so on, who were very influential. Mark Hooper and Dallas Rimmer and players of that ilk. The point being that he passed it on to my mother. I think my uncle was also Wednesdayite, but it was my mother who kind of continued the tradition. And it seemed logical that I should pick it up, in as much as my father was born in Manchester and was actually a Manchester United fan. And when we lived in Salford, being in the shadow of Old Trafford almost, he would take me along to watch Manchester United reserves. But my passion was, once I discovered there was a team called Wednesday, was for Wednesday. So you are a fourth generation Wednesdayite. So there you go. And that's really just how it started. It was really very simple in that respect. It's just a family thing, you know, it's tribal loyalty.
I thought it was interesting. I remember you saying that your dad, who I never met, my granddad, who, you said he was born in Newton Heath, I think, before.
Yeah, that's right. Blakely, that sort of area of Manchester, but Newton Heath, yeah. But I don't know whether my grandfather on that side, on the Lancastrian side, was a Man U supporter, for he died before I was born. So, I could have been sat here talking about why Maguire is such a terrible defender, but I'm not going to be.
Well, I often make references to Harry Maguire's large turning circle on the podcast, Dad, so you might have heard that. So
yeah, so
maybe
yes,
there's a bit of a link anyway.
It's clearly a thing to be shared.
So, Dad, do you have any memories kind of regarding, I guess, my family that you want to bring up regarding Wednesday?
Yes, I mean, I remember going with your older brother to watch Wednesday in a driving snowstorm when they beat Swansea, and I remember walking to the ground thinking they can't possibly play in this, but they did, and they won. That was a happy day. Absolutely hammered Swansea, I think. The one story I do remember was going with your mother. We'd been on holiday in Cumbria, and this was before any of you children were born. And we'd gone from Cumbria over to Middlesbrough. It was end of season, and Wednesday were not playing particularly well. The game at Middlesbrough was awful because Wednesday were losing 6-0. And I remember saying to your mum, we should go, because it ain't going to get any better. And we headed off the terracing at what was Ayrton Park, and the gates were locked. So we had to go back and wait, and another goal went in. Again, and this time the gates were open, and as we left the ground, there was as Middlesbrough scored their 8th goal, which I didn't see. So sadly, I always resolve that one should never leave a football ground before the end. That day, I think it was lost at 6-0.
I had a similar memory of going away to watch Wednesday at Leicester, where it was Brian Lawes' last game. And it was just absolute drag. It was just, I really enjoyed what I got to see of Brian Laws managing Wednesday, but strong memories of just kind of watching him at the point where didn't really have any options, and I hate saying this about someone, but kind of looked a bit clueless. But I remember going down after the second goal to try and get out of the ground, and the steward not letting us out. And then the third one came in, and then the third one scored, and then they started playing the Kasabian music they had, and then they just went, okay, just let them go.
Yeah. And maybe it's a rule amongst these football stewards is if they're suffering, make them suffer more. Make them stay and suffer. Yeah.
Do you have a memory? Like, this wasn't a question I kind of prompted you on, so I apologize, but you're kind of leading me in this direction, Dad. Like, what was your first memory of being a Wednesdayite, or your earliest memory that you can recall?
It's difficult because I played football in the street as a kid, as everyone did, and certainly in Salford. Then this was amazing. There were play streets where kids would play on the street and the road was closed certain times of the day. You wouldn't have it now because there are too many cars around and people are too impatient. But I probably played football, but I don't think there was ever an identity with a club the way there is now. I think a lot of kids have, obviously, football shirts bought them. They're introduced to it at a much, much earlier age. There are babies with bibs saying, I'm a Wednesdayite, and all the rest of it up the aisle. So it didn't happen then. There were no, fan shirts. So I ended up in North London with my parents, obviously. And my father had taken me along to watch Spurs a couple of times. In fact, I think he once took me on a Christmas Day, which is probably one of the last Christmas Day fixtures ever played, of which I remember nothing but a long walk because there were no buses. We lived about 3 miles from Tottenham. And so I kind of was introduced to football. I'd gone with my parents, I remember, to watch Manchester City play somebody over in Manchester. But there wasn't an affinity with a particular club until I think at some point my mother must have told me about how wonderful Wednesday were. And I started looking at the results. And at that time, in the late 50s, Wednesday were coming out of their famous yo-yo period, and actually had put together a team that could challenge and did challenge in what was then the First Division. Actually, it's still the First Division now, but we have a new title to glory in, but it's still the First Division. So I kind of fastened onto this, but I went to a school in Boreham Wood, which was a London County Council overflow estate, which was full of Spurs fans. I think everybody came from Edmonton or Tottenham. And I, of course, had no interest in Spurs, who at that point were the mighty Spurs. They were quite a big, they were a very big club in England, won the double, first time in the 20th century. So, and Wednesday finished runners-up to them. But my first recollection of watching Wednesday was I went to watch Wednesday play at Arsenal on Boxing Day 1960. And I had probably my best friend was actually an Arsenal fan. And we decided to go together and we sat in the lower stand at Highbury. And the stand was sort of, the seats were continued as a terrace in front of me. Wednesday drew 1-1, and it was a misty day. There's another bit of a story after this, but it's the only time I've ever been punched at a football match. And we were sat on the front row of this, the lower stand, as it were. And some kid must have decided, because I had a Wednesday scarf on, it was blue and white, obviously, and not red and white, that I should be punched. So he jumped up from the terracing and punched me on the top of the head. Now, I was quite surprised at this because I don't think violence at football matches was a thing then, but clearly it happened. And since then, I've never actually been in any physical confrontation, but I take my hat off, although I didn't have a hat on at the time, to this Arsenal fan. The corollary of this story is that Wednesday lost a player that day, which is very tragic, is that they had a promising young inside forward called Dougie McMillan. And McMillan had travelled with the team. In those days, there was no substitute. And he'd gone, but they used to let younger players travel with the team to get the flavour of, being at the big game. And on the way back north in the coach, he was sat at the front and it was icy. The coach skidded off the road. His leg was trapped, and the only way to get him out was to cut his leg off. And that was the end of Dougie McMillan's career. I do believe that subsequently he did some coaching with Hallam, even with his, artificial leg. But that was the end of his football career. So yes, I kind of remember that game for two things. One is reading the next day about this terrible accident, and also being punched on top of the head. But there we are. That was my first contact with Wednesday. And who knew that Wednesday would create so much ire amongst fans and the gods? But there we go.
So, Dad, I think you're kind of picking into obviously Wednesday, that's a different age and different generations. What's your favorite Wednesday 11 of all time? If you could pick that, who would you?
Now, this is very interesting because I kind of made a note on this, and I thought, first of all, what formation would I go with?
That's a difficult one. Yeah.
Well, in the old days, it was always 2-3-5. The number of sort of articles you saw of old footballers choosing their favourite ever team was always 2-3-5. I'm going to go with 4-4-2. I know it's not fashionable, but okay, here we go. Springett in goal. Ron Springett, not Peter. Peter was always in the shadow of his brother. And the story goes that he made this fabulous save on joining Wednesday in '67. And the comment loudly from the crowd was, your brother would have caught that. Ron Springett, the only Wednesday player to ever win a World Cup medal, although it came kind of at the end of his life, because he was on the bench, and it was a late decision to give them World Cup medals after '66. Springett was probably the best goalkeeper I've ever seen in a Wednesday shirt. I mean, there have been some good goalkeepers. There've been some memorable games from them, but Springett didn't let more than 4 goals in for about 7 years. He really was an excellent goalkeeper. And of course, he came from QPR. He lived in London. He used to train with QPR, not with Wednesday, he'd come on match day. And apparently he played centre forward in practice matches. And he really liked it. I remember going to see Wednesday. There used to be benefit matches, testimonials. You don't really get them so much now. But there was one where, I can't remember who it was for, but Springett actually in the second half played centre forward and scored 2 goals. Admittedly, it was just a kickabout. But on the other hand, he was also in an era when goalkeepers had to be braced for contact. Now they're a protected species. Nobody dare touch a goalkeeper because they fall over and wave their arms feebly. But a goalkeeper then had to stand up to robust challenges, let's say. So Springett in goal. Oh, one final story about Springett. He had a very good record against Jimmy Greaves, who I'm sure you've heard of, who apparently he used to mock Jimmy Greaves by saying, "Are you the Greaves who scores all the goals?" Anyway, right back has to be Roland Nilsson. There can be no doubt in my mind. probably one of the finest footballers I've ever seen, you know, as a player. And there were apparently personal issues why he went back to Sweden, but he could really have been at Hillsborough for 10 years. You know, I mean, anyway, he was excellent. Left back, I'm going to go straight to left back, and I'm going to say Gary Megson's dad, Don. Don was basically a tank. He played in the 60s. He was captain of Wednesday. And when Wednesday lost in the 66 Cup final, which I still hurts, these things never go away. He was the first losing captain to take the team on a lap round Wembley, you know. So tremendous, powerful guy. You know, he played over 440 games for Wednesday. He was just incredibly solid. Centre backs. Now we have to have two centre backs in the current mode. It didn't used to be that way. It was centre back and kind of left half in the old structure. I would go with Peter Swan, again of the same era of Megson. Peter Swan was the most elegant footballer I've ever seen. Very, very commanding. He should have played more for England. He fell ill before the 62 World Cup in Chile and lost his place. He probably would have been in the squad for 66, but as we all know, there was the bribes case, which was a great shame. He did come back. He did come back to Wednesday, and he never scored for Wednesday. He barely crossed the halfway line. That was just not his job. And yet he was very good in the air. I'll tell you a story about Swan later. Anyway, but interestingly, he, after leaving Wednesday, having come back from the bribery thing, he went to Bury and he scored for them after 2 minutes, I believe. So it's like 270, 280 games for Wednesday, more than that. Never scored, goes to Bury and puts one in. Next to him, this is the difficult one. It's either Des Walker, who also was famous for not really crossing the halfway line, and very good England international, and of all people, Laurie Madden. Now, Laurie Madden played alongside Mick Lyons. He came on a free transfer. He was kind of an old-fashioned defender. I can't describe it more than that. He just simply did his job. And he wasn't, I don't think he was dirty. I don't think he was physical. I think he had to be. But I don't think there was anything that marked him out other than he was just there. He just did the right things. So it's a toss-up between Madden or Walker. I'd put one of them on the bench, obviously. But you're not asking about the bench. Now my midfield four. Okay. On the right wing, I would have to go, and I'm talking wingers here because I still believe in wingers. You know, I still believe in the person herring down the line and putting it across. I would have to go with Willie Henderson. Now, Henderson came briefly at the end of his career. He got, I think he came on a free. The story was he was short-sighted, so all he could do was beat people. He used to play with his socks rolled down. You wouldn't allow it now. Referees would stop and send you off to put your shin pads in. But Willie Henderson played with socks round his ankles. He was small, squat, grinned a lot, and he had a kind of zest for playing. It's a shame we didn't see him when he was younger. But he was quite something. And on the left, I'll go to the left wing this time. Of course, it's got to be Chris Waddle. Who else could it be? I've seen some complete failures on the left at Hillsborough. But I've got to say that Waddle had it all. Any player who can score against that other team in Sheffield, who shall remain nameless, like Voldemort, we shall never name them. I think Waddle was just superb. Inside, what would be kind of midfielders, inside forwards? Well, John Sheridan, clearly, he at his best, he just got it right. There's been other midfielders who had flashes of it. Bannon has got it, obviously. There's a guy called Brian Hornsby, who for a time I thought was absolutely superb. But Sheridan, yeah. And even if nothing else, scoring against Manchester United at Wembley, well, we've got to take our hats off to that. Next to him, I would go with somebody who scored 3 times at Wembley for different clubs, Jim McCalliog. Now, McCalliog came to Wednesday from Chelsea in the mid-60s. He was a Scottish lad. He scored at Wembley for Wednesday. He scored the following year for Scotland at Wembley. And 10 years after that or so, he scored for Southampton at Wembley to win them the cup. So McCalliog had, to me, he was busy, creative. He could score. He scored in the semi-final and the final for Wednesday, as far as I can recall. And McCalliog really was, to me, an excellent midfielder. He played, actually, the Wednesday manager at the time, Alan Brown. Wednesday didn't have a big centre forward that they wanted to rely on. Although, interestingly, they let a guy called John Hickton go to Middlesbrough, who kept banging them in, like crazy. But Wednesday played the 2 inside forwards, Ford and Phantom, as the attack, with McCalliog as a false number 9, and the 2 wingers, Quinn and Pugh, would drop back to a kind of midfield role. So it was like rather than a traditional W formation of the time, it was an M. And I thought McCalliog was very good. Now we come to the strikers. David Hurst, at his best, he just was a goal scorer. And, these people should be treasured. People who know how to put the ball in the net. And he did. Although, curiously, I still remember him putting a header over against Hull. I think he scored 4 goals in that game. And I was furious that I thought it was a simple header that he managed to steer over the bar. And next to him, I would probably go, because you can't have 2 strikers the same, I would go with John Phantom. Phantom, depends how you want to pronounce it. Phantom was born in Sheffield. He was apparently good at cricket. He lived at, Pitsmoor, Burngreave. He scored over 150 goals for Wednesday. He just was always in the right place to put the ball in the net. Again, goal scorer, that's what you need. He only got 1 England cap, which I think was against Luxembourg, but it was a time when there were a lot of choice for England. It's like now, there's always a lot of choice for England players, but at least he got something. So that would be my 4-4-2. I'm probably being unfair to some excellent players who I've left out of it. And like all these things, it's a matter for great debate. Who was better? Because we can never see them on the pitch at the same time. And we must also remember there was a decline in all of them. I mean, Springer, the story went round that his eyesight was going, which is why Wednesday swapped him back to QPR and got his brother Peter. McAleog went to Wolves because Wednesday were in decline. Waddle was coming to the end of his career. You know, that, so there is always a sadness that, you know, you remember their best bits and not, you know, how in a sense it begins to end up.
Hurst had an appointment with a stone at the Middlewood training ground, as he told him.
Yeah. Players have to, I suppose, drop out of the game in all sorts of odd ways, you know, or, you know, begin their decline in a quite unexpected way. But there we go.
I was wondering if you could tell me your top 3 goals you've seen, and I guess that could either be for Wednesday or against Wednesday. Well, you could probably.
There's lots of the thing about goals, of course, is you see a lot of them. And some of them are memorable, of course, and some of them not really. The ball just ends up in the net, and there are times where you think, I don't know how that went in. This was a particular nightmare when, for a time, I used to report reserve matches in Sheffield, both Wednesday and at the other place. And I used to dread when there was a goal mouth scramble because there was no one else for me to ask. I believe the tradition in football journalism was to ask everyone else in the press box who put it in the net. But anyway, top goals, without a doubt, the one that a player who I used to like, this was a guy played right back for Wednesday called Peter Johnson, scored for Wednesday at Spurs. Now, this was a game in November of '62, and I'd gone to watch Wednesday. Because I lived down south, I could really only watch Wednesday when they went to London. And I went along to White Hart Lane, and I think Wednesday had been tonked at White Hart Lane the previous season, and I kind of wasn't that, you know, Spurs were going well, Wednesday were okay-ish at that point. And Johnson played right back for Wednesday. He'd come from Rotherham as an outside right, but Wednesday had made him into a right back. And he was injured. Now, this was the days before substitutes, and if a player hadn't broken his leg, you know, if he was put back on the field. And I remember Johnson being taken off with a towel of all things round his shoulders, as if that would help. And he came back on, and he was limping on the wing. Wednesday got a breakaway. The ball was played to him, and he set off running for the Spurs goal. Now, White Hart Lane, at the time, it's all gone now, but the pitch was never great at White Hart Lane, even in this time of the year. It was November. And he kept going, and Spurs had been caught out, and Maurice Norman, the centre-half, was snapping at his heels, but didn't bring him down. He could have, these days, you almost think, yeah, that's going to be the professional foul. And Johnson got to the edge of the area, and the Spurs keeper came out, and Johnson planted the most lovely shot, just tucked it inside the post, a foot inside the post, a foot off the ground, and the game finished 1-1. Now, I think that incredibly brave run, and he certainly was far from fit when he did it, he was out for several games, obviously, afterwards. You know, it was... I like to think that goal was the best I've ever seen. Having said that, there've been so many good goals. You know, you can pick out Bannon at Wimbledon. Sorry, MK don't. Did I say Wimbledon? Did I let that slip out? And so Bannon at Milton Keynes. And so on, you know, John Harkes, the American, at Derby, where he beat Peter Shilton from about 40 yards. And of course, we've already mentioned, or I've mentioned, Waddle scoring that free kick against the other lot at Wembley. All of these things stand out. But there are odd goals that stand out. I remember Wednesday had this midfielder called Peter Eustace, who took a penalty. And this would, nobody else would remember this, but I remember thinking at the time, that was well done. Eustace took a penalty and hit the post, and it rebounded out. And of course, he couldn't get to it, but it fell to a Wednesday centre forward called John Ritchie. Now, John Ritchie had come from Stoke. He scored for Stoke against Wednesday. He scored for Wednesday against Stoke. And he went back to Stoke, where he continued scoring against Wednesday. And Ritchie met it with a volley, which I didn't think was an easy thing to do, and put it in the back of the net. So the assist, I suppose, if you want to say, went to Eustace's penalty. The thing about Ritchie was he was big, tall, and everybody thought he was a big softie. He scored goals, but he never seemed to throw his weight around. However, at that moment, he put the ball in the net. There were really just so many goals. But I suppose the other one I would have to pick out is Crossley, the goalkeeper against Southampton when Wednesday were 3-0 down. And I remarked to your older brother who was with me there, oh, look, Crossley's going up for this corner, losing 3-2, and the header goes in. Beautiful moment. Having said that, I had seen already goals from goalkeepers, notably Peter Ogrizovic with a drop kick for Coventry, which went over Martin Hodges' head on first bounce and into the Wednesday goal.
It was Steve Ogrizovic, wasn't it? Sorry.
Steve Ogrizovic, yes.
Yeah.
And what did I call him?
Peter.
Peter, no, definitely a Steve, like me. And I have to tell you that goal, the silence must have lasted for 2 seconds when the ball flew over Hodges' head and into the net at the Kop end. And it was this sort of, it seemed like an eternal silence. And gradually people were saying, that's a goal, that. Nobody could believe it.
If ever a goal needed a declarative statement, it was that one. You said.
Yeah. I used to have, I knew this guy who wrote for TV. I've told you this. And he used to laugh about the fact, there were comics like Roy of the Rovers. You heard of Roy of the Rovers?
Yes, yeah.
Haven't everybody? And he said there would be a drawing of Roy Race scoring a goal, and the crowd in the background, there would be one voice saying, that's quite a shot, or that's a really good goal. And on the other side of the terracing, there'd be another voice saying, yes, it's good, isn't it? Like, this is the only conversation in the whole ground.
Yes.
Is between two strangers, 50 yards apart.
Everyone else very politely courting silence so these two strangers can have a banal conversation.
Yeah. But that was the art of comics, so we shouldn't knock it. Other than that, I never saw people like Derek Dooley play. I probably missed all sorts of good goals. I seem to remember Chris Brunt getting, and Whelan, the player, scoring stunning goals and things like that. But in the context of the occasion, some things seem more significant than others.
Yeah, that's very true.
Oh, and I must say that one more best goals ever. Who can possibly forget the Boxing Day massacre and Mellor belting in that long-range shot to start off the defeat, that famous defeat of the other lot?
Was it? So that was Ian Mellor, wasn't it? Neil Mellor's dad. Was his nickname Spider?
Yes, he was. He was a gangly outside left. It's one of the peculiar things that we were talking earlier about outside left, why they either don't last longer or I don't know. They kind of don't make a continued impact. But yeah, Mello did well that day, and it was a great goal. Mind you, all those 4 goals were great. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
They all went in the right place. So greatest goals, so many, so many that I wish I, could relive. I mean, yes, we've now got the miracle of YouTube to start watching them.
Did this give a conversation before, Dad? Like just going on goals. Were you at the game when was it I think it was Hurst for Wednesday against Man City, and there was no cameraman at the game, so there's no kind of recorded coverage. I think he scored a hat-trick, and he went in net as well.
I remember him going in the net. I don't remember the goals. There was some peculiar things like that. I don't know why there would be no cameras at the game. And I can't remember it.
There is a story
Except
about it.
I do remember him going in goal.
There is a story about it being a rarity because of some camera mishap. And it was like one of the rareness of, no.
Now they go with
no coverage
to guard against it. Yes.
I believe so.
Yeah.
Going on to Wednesday memories, Dad, do you top 3 memories, or even feel free to please give me more memories?
Well, over the years, and a lot of them are sort of things sometimes not directly to do with football. I mean, there was a time I was nearly locked in Hillsborough. I'd gone to report a reserve match, and there was the usual sparse 100 people in the crowd, and then I was in the press box. Now, in those days, the press box was next to the director's box, and there was a press room under the stand. And the idea was you went into the press room and you picked a telephone up, the old-fashioned type, none of this modern technology, and plugged it in under a little bench so that you had somewhere to write your notes. And and you would do the report. I would have to do 80 words on the game, and then I would have to phone in the result to a press agency in London, because in those days, newspapers, they don't do it now. Newspapers used to publish the results of all sorts of matches. There was a list every day of things like, football combination reserves and things like that. So I'd phoned in the result, whatever it was. I can't remember it was again. So the ground was, they were beginning to turn the floodlights off. And I went to take the phone back and leave the ground. I got to the press room and it was locked. And I thought, oh God. So I had a phone in my hand, So immediately I put it back somewhere safe and went down to the door, and the doors were locked and there was no one around. And then the lights in the stand began to go off. And I was herring through the south stand, desperately looking for a door that I could bang on. And as fate would have it, there was a door into the players' lounge, and I pushed it and they hadn't locked it properly. And this bloke said, "Oi, what are you doing here?" I said, "Trying to get out." So that was just one of those panic moments of, what do I do? So that was a memory of Wednesday. Gratefully, I did not spend the night in Hillsborough, curled up in the south stand waiting for dawn.
So you covered reserve matches. So you work for just as a bit of background, people will know, you work for the Star, didn't you, Dad?
Yeah, but this wasn't done through the Star. This was an agency, which has gone. The agency used to be on London Road, and they would, for some reason, have this contract to go and cover reserve matches, which of course then were midweek. Now, I've got to tell you, the only Saturday one I ever covered was the worst game of football I've ever seen. Wednesday were playing Blackpool Reserves, or the Blackpool paper insisted they were called Blackpool Reserve, not plural. So I was watching Wednesday play Blackpool. It was March, it was a sunny afternoon. It was the only Saturday reserve fixture I ever covered. They must have had other people to do, the Saturday games. I just got the midweek games, either, the other place or Hillsborough. And this game started. I had to phone in a report every 15 minutes to Blackpool with an update of how the game was going, probably 40, 50 words. That's what they wanted to cover this. And this game, there was one shot on goal after 10 minutes and nothing else happened. And if I say nothing else happened, I mean nothing. I was reduced to making a note of throw-ins. There was just nothing. And I was having to phone these words in to Blackpool every 15 minutes, basically saying it was a nice day. There were throw-ins taken. It was just horrible. And then to follow it up, I had to do 200 words on the game for the Blackpool paper, which I think I described the weather for as long as I could. And well, that was
Really
horrible.
chewed up that allowance on the weather. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there are some 0-0 draws that you think that was a great game. I've got to say that 0-0 draw was the worst thing I've ever seen. I'd rather go and have root canal treatment than watch that game again. So there was that. So the other sort of memory of covering those reserve matches, one of the games was 7-4, and that was, and I can't really, I think Wednesday were playing Huddersfield Reserves and then finished 7-4. So there were good times as well. My other sort of memory was sometimes as a fans, I went to Hillsborough once, it was 65, Wednesday was Boxing Day fixture, although it was the 27th of December. And it was a nice day. And the thing about football back in the 60s was that everybody smoked. And everybody at Christmas got cigars, or little cigars. So the aroma at football matches, Boxing Day, was just unbelievably rich, with all this cigar smoke. And of course, even on the cot where it was open, because, there was no cover on the cot. Astonishing. And Wednesday were playing Arsenal, and Wednesday were 3-0 up after 12 minutes. And of course, we Wednesdayites are thoroughly enjoying this. And I remember this guy turning up, pushing his way through the crowd with his little cigar in his hands. And like a lot of people who had cigars for Christmas presents, looking very smug, saying, "What's the score?" Because there was no electronic scoreboard, anything like that. And being told it was 3-0, and him being 12 minutes late, so he'd missed 3 goals. The look on his face was priceless. I still recall that. Fortunately for him, Wednesday did get another goal, so he had something to cheer. The other thing I remember, and this is the worst thing I think I ever did as a football fan, because it was so brainless, was I'd been to see Wednesday about that time play Leeds at Hillsborough. And Wednesday had won 3-0. This was Easter Monday. And I thought, Leeds had just come up, Jack Charlton, Norman Hunter, etc., Bremner. And I thought, we're really good. I'll go to Leeds to watch, the return, because then games were, you played somebody on like Easter Monday, on an Easter Tuesday, you would have the return fixture. Footballers won't put up now with, 2 games in 24 hours, but that's how it was then. So I got on the train to go to Leeds, and I'd never been to Leeds before. And in those days, trains had little compartments. It wasn't a long run through of open seats, and you were squashed into these little compartments with individual doors on bench seats. And there were probably about 10 of us crowded into this compartment. And as we were pulling into Leeds, the train slowed up and stopped. And it was right, and you could see Elland Road from the train.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and God knows why I did what everyone else did. Somebody said, let's go. We won't go to the station. And everybody poured off the train to run across the train tracks. And I still shudder to think what the hell was so, hundreds of Wednesday fans leaping from an admittedly stationary train, but running blindly across train tracks just so they could get to Elland Road without going into the station. And of course, I went with everybody else. So kind of one of those brain dead, why did I do that things afterwards? I mean, fortunately, there was no train coming the other way. So that was incredibly stupid, but you do these things when sometimes you're a bit younger. As it happened, Wednesday lost 2-0, so it wasn't that much fun. In the end, on the other hand, I survived. So there are all sorts of things that you remember. I remember Wednesday beating Manchester United 5-4 in '68, and it was a lovely August day. And I still remember a brown beer bottle flying through the air. Somebody at the back of the cop had obviously finished with this beer bottle, and God knows who they were, but they hoisted this beer bottle down the cop towards the front. I can still remember this brown beer bottle spinning through the air. I don't know who. It was awful. But this type of thing used to happen in football. Now, nobody throws plastic cups around like they used to throw beer bottles. And there's me thinking that football, no, it wasn't that violent, My other big memory, this was, I mentioned Swan before. I'd gone to, being in London, I'd gone to watch Wednesday play at Chelsea. And Chelsea then were a middling team. They didn't have a lot of money. They had good players. And the ground was awful. It had a dog track round it, So I was on the halfway line. And of course, I had my Wednesday scarf on, which was blue and white like Chelsea. And Frank Blunstone, I think, was a winger for Chelsea. And God knows what he'd done. But he was on the halfway line and Peter Swan, right in front of where I was, so fortunately, it was separated by the dog track. And Swan wandered over to stand next to him. And I watched and thought, why? And with the referee was distracted, Swan kicked, I think it was Blunstone on the ankle, who went down like a sack of potatoes. And Swan haired back to the centre circle. The crowd were seeing it near me and were howling angrily. I slid my Wednesday scarf off. Like, nothing to do with me. Football was tough then, things like this happened. I remember going to watch Rotherham play Wolves, and a former Wednesday player was playing for Rotherham. I don't know whether I should name him, if he's still alive. But I saw him jump for the ball and come down with his knee in the back of a guy, a Wolves player, which I think was deliberate. And I actually felt sick. I actually thought, again, right in front of me, I thought, it's awful. But these things used to happen. So you kind of remember odd things like that rather than great flowing football in a way. Yeah, you talk about the great games and the great players, but it's the odd things like going to away matches and being able to walk round the ground to get to the behind your own team's goal. You know, you would pass the home fans going in the opposite direction at half time. All that's gone now, you know. You stay in your seat, you know. But you used to go and stand and watch football, and you know. And the funny thing about all this was there was someone near you sounding off, and people did. You would just go and stand somewhere else. You can't do that now. You know, stay in your seat. You bought that seat. That's your seat.
So you're saying the people in the crowd at Roy the Rovers could have had that conversation closer to each other?
They could. They could have got closer to each other and not had to shout. I mean, they really didn't do their voice box any good to do that. Yeah, so there are all sorts of odd things I remember. I mean, you know, meeting. I did meet a few of the players, not many.
Well, that's going to kind of dovetail into, I guess, my final question I got prepared for you, which was you've mentioned some kind of stories about your memories of kind of covering the club and having those kind of behind the scene moments that, you know, I think I've been a little bit fortunate to have a couple within my Wednesday fandom. And, you know, I have my own memories of, you know, Darren Potter requesting that he has Sky Sports in his hotel. Not quite worthy to make a full story of, but things like that.
I don't know. It depends who was paying, you know. Yeah. Go on. Yes.
No. So do you have any other fun stories about covering the clubs? You've mentioned your one about being in the, you know, nearly locked within Hillsborough Stadium.
No, yeah. I never had that trouble at the other place. Although a couple of kids did come up to me there and want my autograph, which took me a lot to persuade them that I wasn't actually anyone important, just because I was sat in the press box. It was really nice of them. I don't know what they would have done with my autograph, nor did they know who I was. Of course, the other thing I remember was I used to look like George Best. This you may find extremely hard to believe, but I had a beard and a shaggy haircut in the Best style. And I was once on a bus in Sheffield, and this kid came up to me and said, "You're George Best, aren't you?" And I said, "No." He said, "Yes, you are. Will you sign this?" I mean, "No, I'm not George Best." What on earth is George Best doing on the bus in Sheffield?
In Sheffield, yeah.
But you know, but anyway, I shaved the beard off and no longer looked like George Best. I think it was the beard and the shaggy hair when I had them, which did it. The only other thing I remember was I was talking to Mick Lyons at the Wednesday training ground, and it was the day Wednesday signed Imre Verardi. Verardi had to borrow a pair of boots because he'd just been signed from Newcastle. And we, you know, whipped down from the northeast to, you know, and this is, you know, do players borrow football boots now, or are they all very well equipped?
I think we all love a story of a player having to be hoisted somewhere very quickly and, you know, barely getting a bin bag to toss some belongings into, you know,
to put their medals in.
Yeah.
And also, I remember going to meet a player once, and Brian Marwood turned up wearing a pink jumper, one of those fine V-neck pink jumpers. But nobody wore pink in those days, and everybody was a bit astonished.
Did he get any flack for his pink jumper?
Well, there were kind of a few jibes, but I think in the, you know, the way football clubs are, they're all used to this. They all do this. They all banter. It's actually the reason why anybody plays football. It's a banter. It's the jokes and sniping at people, which is one of the great things about football fans. You know, I mean, I've seen sports events in America, and and they're enthusiastic, but they don't have the passion that football fans have. You know, they don't have the wit. Some of the wit of football fans is just awesome. You know, I mean, there was a story of one goalkeeper, probably shouldn't name, it could be allegations of bribery. And fans were waving £10 notes as he got ran onto the pitch. You know, it's just splendid. And I just think it's something about football fans, certainly in this country, who are just incredibly witty and funny. They can also be very naive, you know, but on the other hand, the jokes are great. And the songs are great. You know, the crowd singing "We All Live on a Blue and White Cop." All our friends are here on board, Jim McCalliog and David Ford. You know, it's just awesome. And I know now everyone sings, you know, the current song, but then people used to just make them up with whatever was big in the charts. And that again was another thing which, I don't know, does that happen now? Do people make up songs? I don't know whether current songs lend themselves to that.
Not so much.
I don't know. But yeah.
Can you tell me?
Sorry, go on.
Sorry, I was going to ask. Like, how long has Honolulu Wednesday been a thing?
I've got no idea. You've just surprised me.
No, I just randomly came up. I'm like, that is it's a very antiquated chant. It's a beautiful antiquated chant, but like,
I don't remember it. For some reason, that's escaped my memory of the songs we used to sing. I say we used to sing. That's when I had a voice and would join in this type of thing. But of course, the other story, I must tell you this. Because football fans used to be mixed up, you know, there was no segregated thing. You would basically stand next to a bunch of the opposition. And you would bait them and they would bait you back. And that was the give and take of it all. But we were playing the other lot at Hillsborough in a local derby. And people had turned up, obviously from work, and so there'd be their lot and Wednesdayites standing together because they were mates at work. And I overheard some of these, whatever they're called, these other people. I heard the Wednesdayites saying Wednesday were really unlucky last week when they hit the post. And this very smug member of the other clan said, that's not bad luck, that's bad shooting. Okay. In the game, this other team proceeded to hit the post 3 times. And this bloke looked furious because he wanted to shout unlucky name of club and couldn't because it was bad shooting. So that kind of the object lesson there was, no, don't say something like that. Because as far as I'm concerned, the other lot have always, unlucky has preceded their name so often. But he couldn't shout it, poor soul. You know.
The other lot are always proud as well. They're proud of everything they do. Every failure, they're always proud.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. But on the other hand, we're all proud of our teams. We might be rubbish, but it's our rubbish. The other thing I just want to say is I used to have this theory about the 30-year cycle of Wednesday. I may have mentioned this to you many years ago. Is looking at the history of the club, we seem every 30 years to peak. So 1900, 1930, 1960. Oh, look, 1990. Yes, you know, we're Europe. You know, we were in Intertoto Cup. We were there.
Our last silverware. Yes.
Yeah, you know, and all the rest of this. And so we're due now, aren't we, in 2020? Except somehow it didn't happen. Maybe the 30-year cycle is. slipped out of sync.
I guess so, because I mean, probably the best we've had is probably 2016, 17, that neck of the woods.
Yes. Which was a sort of build up to it's going to get better for 2020. And then, of course, other events took place, which threw large spanners in the works, literally, people's health, and Wednesday deciding that, they could spend money, which allegedly they didn't have. I don't know. I must be careful. Yeah, maybe we're building back to that. Maybe it's just slightly delayed, Maybe it's a 31-year cycle, 32-year cycle. Said he, hastily consulting the astrology charts. But one thing I will say, Luke, is that it has never been an easy ride being a Wednesdayite. I know there are teams who've never won anything. The problem for Wednesday is they have won things, and we tend to think we should be winning more of it. I'm not a big believer in we are a big club, you are where you are, the league table never lies, etc. But it has been uniquely tough being a Wednesday fan. Largely because we are the senior club, in the area. There's no two ways about that. Your turn.
I was just going to say, I think I still love the imagery, as silly as it is, of the sleeping giant, the eternal hibernation of the sleeping giant. it might slowly look like it's coming out of sleep, or when I'm your age, perhaps, maybe.
Well, I hope that you have much success by the time you get to my age. It's rather a sadness for me that I didn't go to Wembley when Wednesday beat Manchester United. I went for the Hull terrible game against Hull. Was terrible.
Yeah.
Despite the enthusiasm of the fans, and I was at Wembley in '66 when we lost a 2-0. Well, we threw away a 2-0 lead. Everton were the luckiest team ever that day, but so it goes. That's football. I kind of didn't. Well, there was a reason, because your older brother was in hospital with his appendix. So
I was going to say,
I watched it from the comfort of a bedside chair with him as Wednesday beat Manchester United. But I did have a ticket, which I did actually hand over to somebody else, which they were eternally grateful for. But family first. So I would like to think that there should have been more events like that. There seem to have been a lot of semi-finals where we didn't quite pull it off, or something happened. And some of them were the usual suspects that we come up against, like Everton, but you still keep, as I say, it's our rubbish, and we still keep standing by it, and still, and I'm still puzzled why anybody likes anybody else in the area.
Yeah.
But I know my cousin was a big mad fan of the other team, because I think he felt that he didn't want to be in a family which supported one club. And so there are lots of reasons why people have allegiances, but Sheffield Wednesday are the senior club, and there's no getting away from it. And as senior club, everybody wants to beat us in the area, and sometimes, sadly, they do. But this is the life of a true football fan. Whereas, I now mix with people who have, you know, through my playing football at my advanced age, who have incredible allegiances to teams that they've never seen play. You know, you know, I don't get that. Just a little aside, there was a Plymouth fan who was the other week was saying about Wednesdays, and he was saying, we beat you, you know, at Home Park or wherever they play. And I just said, well, you know, yes, it was good result for your lads. I'm so glad we don't support a team like Plymouth. So you know, there's always a bit of banter you can throw back at people, you know, when they're trying things again. Hey ho, all banter. That's what it's all about.
I think we've covered it all. Anything that comes to mind that we missed, or anything?
Well, there's lots of things. It depends how far you want to go into it. I mean, memories play false in one sense. You know, you remember certain things as being magical when they weren't, and little things like I remember watching Wednesday B team at Hillsborough, and Kevin Pressman had got the goalkeeper's slot, and did England beat Northern Ireland? I can't remember, but I do remember Pressman came out for a ball that was never his, and this other team scored. And I remember thinking, that's your England chance gone, mate. You know, and you know, hey ho. You know, you remember little things like that, rather than sometimes, as I said before, the magic of, you know, flowing moves and fabulous goals and, you know, and so on. There's just little moments that stick in your mind and you just think, oh yeah, I remember that. That was a shame. Other than that, we were talking about top 11 players. We should name a sub. There should always be one substitute. By the way, here's a little known fact. You know, when the first substitutes came on, the players did not have a numbered shirt.
Really? So you have a player, you would have a player on the pitch with Sans
with
number,
no number on their back.
number.
Yes, and I mean, that was, I think the first time I saw a substitute come on was David Ford, and Wednesday had gone out of that. They were in the interregnum where they didn't have stripes and they had that blue body with the white sleeves for a few years. And he somehow looked incredibly thin without a number on his back. I remember looking at him thinking, you look frail. It lacked a white number on his back.
So numbers are fattening. This is what we've learned.
And numbers are fattening, yes. Particularly, obviously, the bigger numbers. So he would have had 12, which then became the thing, because players only wore 1 to 11, which did allow us, can I just say, it did allow us when John Ritchie, who I mentioned before, scored a hat-trick for Wednesday, and he wore the number 9. And somebody, I remember saying, it had been a long time since a Wednesday number 9 scored a hat-trick. Well, now you wouldn't say it's a long time since a number 71 scored a hat-trick, you know, or whatever. But yes, so Wednesday, the old substitutes didn't have a number. And they had to first only to be brought on for injury, which, of course, guess what? Players went down injured when they weren't. No, how dishonest we were in those days.
It's different time, Dad, clearly.
So who would be my substitute? I would probably say Lee Bullen. Didn't he play in all 11 positions for Wednesday?
He did indeed, yes. Yeah.
So he would have worn numbers 1 to 11. You know, and 12.
Surely an alternative football chant in the making, along the Nilsson and Hurst chant, you know.
Yes. Yeah. But oddly, one thing I do remember is the kind of breakthrough of television coverage. And there is, I don't know whether it was true, but the story goes that the commentator on BBC, for those of you watching in black and white, Manchester United are in red. This was the days when televisions were mostly black and white. But the kind of the transition, one of the things that obviously I've observed is the transition from wall-to-wall football on television. You know, shall I watch the French league tonight, or is there a game from Turkey on? You know, it's kind of the way football is now on television. But the shockwave when a game was broadcast live, you know, other than the cup final, you know, now we expect every game to be broadcast live. And also newspaper coverage, how reserved it was, although there was always drama. You know, I remember the headline, Wednesday player gets booked. This was before yellow cards. A player called Pancho Pearson, his name was Mark, but he had long sideboards, you know, sideburns. And Pancho Pearson was booked, had his name taken, and this was headlines. Nowadays, it's really just sort of, well, how many players, you know, have been booked? Oh, look, only 7 type of thing. But yeah, football changes. And obviously for the better, it's faster, players are stronger, fitter, more skillful. You know, there's a lot of plus points about football now. I mean, I remember you mentioned before, can I just say, about watching other people. I remember Gordon West, the Everton goalkeeper, coming out at the other ground for the second half with a cigarette, you know, cupped in his hand, which he threw in the back of the goal, you know, having taken one last drag. I don't think that would really happen now. I don't think, you know, players would be having a fag at half time. But one thing about my history of watching football is because I live down south, I used to do things like just go and watch football anywhere. And I mean, I went to QPR when they played at a sports stadium called White City. And White City had been built, I think, for the 48 Olympics. Can't remember. And it was horrible because there was, you know, it was like the shallow bowl. Not only was it QPR in what was 3rd division, but, you know, it was a shallow bowl with a running track around it, which was even worse than Chelsea's dog track. And the football seemed a million miles away. But I used to go and watch games at places like West Ham and, you know, Millwall, Spurs, Arsenal. Never went to Brentford. But then again, I could turn up at places like Watford and watch somebody who played for Wednesday, Jim McInerney, brother of Tom, playing for Watford, you know, things like that. You see, that was the thing about football then, and forgive me for banging on about this. I know I've talked about it before. Footballers were a kind of smallish group. They weren't international in that true sense. They were the home countries. You know, there were Irish players, Scottish players, Welsh players, English players. But you didn't really get anybody from abroad. So you kind of knew the same players were moving around the game. You know, I mean, the story goes that, by the way, just thinking of transfers, just a little bit of a memory just comes back. The story was that Wednesday had heard that Burnley were selling this winger who went to Manchester United. So again, this is a time the secretary and the chairman jumped in a car and drove at high speed over to Turf Moor, where only to learn that this player was indeed for sale and had gone to Manchester United. And supposedly Wednesday, these two from Wednesday said, have you got anybody else available? While we're here. And we ended up with Sammy not Sammy McElroy, I can't remember his name. Sammy Todd, that was the guy. Sammy Todd, wing half for Northern Ireland. I just like the idea of turning up at a ground, club and saying, have you got anybody for sale?
Yeah, much like a trip to the supermarket. Yeah.
Absolutely. What's on offer today? But the football has changed, and great that it has. There's so many good things now, and it's being able to watch it again in slow motion. Blink and you miss it in those days, or in the case of the man turning up 12 minutes late on Boxing Day, be slightly late and you've missed most of it. The best bits of the game. So football's different. Will continue to evolve, but where will Wednesday be? That's our only question.
Indeed. Well, thank you so much, Dad. I really appreciate you taking the time to chat to me and come on the podcast, and I've really enjoyed this. And yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, and good luck. It's been great podcast, great listening. It's good to know that the spirit of Wednesday is alive. Long may it last. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dad.
Bye.
Bye.
So we're nothing but honest on this podcast, Luke. And I think in the interest of full disclosure, we're recording these sort of top and tail segments in a position where I have heard around about half of your interview with your dad. And you have heard none of the interview with Suzanne. So it's a fun thing. This is a kind of speculative realm we're living in here. But I've really enjoyed what I've heard so far. I can't wait to hear the rest. But how did you find the experience yourself?
It was wonderful. It's funny because there's a lot of stories of chatting to my dad, things I've heard from chatting to him before, and some things that I haven't heard before. I really enjoyed hearing kind of his analysis of the Wednesday 11.
Yeah.
Just because it's so interesting to think about, like as my dad was saying, like we never know how these players would stack up against from days of yesteryear. I mean, I'm sure that when they do it in FIFA and they bring Beckenbauer's card back and George Best, then I'm sure it's just immaculately comparison.
Oh, I'm sure
those geniuses have figured out a perfect comparison system. But for the rest of us mere mortals, we just have to kind of compare against. So it was really nice to have that dimension. And I guess also a bit more of the kind of generational thing as well. That was really nice to hear, just like kind of passing down and learning that I'm a fourth generation Wednesdayite.
Yeah. No, was there that sort of I have heard, that's one of the elements I've heard, and I really enjoyed that. The kind of span of years that were taken in there with that 11 was very enjoyable. It does make me slightly jealous because I think we kind of caught the tail end of a very golden period, but
and also to get a bit of insight into the fact that the 90s was really a golden period, and to have then someone of my dad's age, to kind of think that for him kind of being around kind of mid-40s, I think at the time, and then being like, getting to see that, and then especially after seeing the generations he'd seen previously in the real front. So that's really special, and maybe that's something that we might be able to afford and see in the rest of our
fingers crossed
lifetime Wednesday supporting careers.
Yes. Absolutely, fingers crossed. But yeah, I love just there's a natural sort of element of sort of anecdotes tumbling together and things being, events becoming more closer and closer entwined through the years and things. So yeah, I really and particularly enjoyed the amusement of being punched in the top of the head, but also then that goes hand in hand with the tragedy of a young player, Dougie McMillan, losing his leg and his career. And so yeah, just it's great. I absolutely loved it, and I really laughed very hard at the Roy of the Rovers riff, because I'd never really noticed that before, but then immediately on hearing it, I was like, oh yeah, because I did read a bit of Roy of the Rovers. Maybe it was kind of throwback Roy of the Rovers in my time, but very funny.
Yeah, and I also think, like, funny in a weird way, kind of growing up, my oldest brother had Viz, and they had a take on that Billy the Fish.
Yes.
Which I think I recognize more of the tropes from the satire. In a weird way, I think this maybe says a lot about me and my generation. Like, someone can mention a film and I'll be like, I haven't seen it, but I know the references from The Simpsons.
Yeah. Yes.
You know,
you've seen it through that fisheye lens of satire. Yeah, good stuff. Were there many sort of stories that were completely new to you? Were there any surprises in there?
There were, yeah. I'm trying to think. Yeah, there was some stuff. That story, particularly including the one about my dad getting punched on top of the head and Dougie McMillan. That was brand new. And him getting it was a bit of an addendum to the conversation. I kind of squeezed it in, I'll be honest, for the transparency. But him and my mum and getting locked in at Millsborough was quite funny as well. That was brand new.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a lot of new jewels, and some stuff I just really glad that I got the chance to chat to him.
Yeah.
Have it kind of held for posterity. So
yeah,
I'm grateful I've got the vehicle to do that, and I think it lent itself to a fun episode.
Definitely.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what a treat. I'm looking forward to polishing off the rest. I'm going to gobble that up on my journey I have ahead of me today. But thanks so much for doing it, and thanks to your dad for doing it as well. It's a real treat, and it's top drawer summer content from Different Gravy, which is it's what we're known for, really.
Obviously, yeah. It's what the brand stands for, folks.
People say that stuff in the season is really boring, where they just talk about the match that we've all seen, but the summer stuff, good. Well, anything else for today's episode, or shall we scoot off and wrap things up?
Let's wrap this one up.
Well, yeah, as I say, thanks to you, thanks to Yadar, and we'll see you again next week, folks. Thanks very much. Look after yourselves.
Thanks, everyone. See you. Bye.